In this long-form presentation, allow about 40 minutes, I introduce the superposition hypothesis, a novel idea that addresses many of the big issues in science, philosophy and religion. I hope you enjoy this Christmas story of how everything fits together. Scientists make observations of the world and then develop theories to explain and predict those observations. Most scientists and much of the general populace hold to a thesis called physicalism, which claims that everything in the world is ultimately composed of fundamental physical entities, such as atoms and fields. I, however, admit a degree of Platonism or idealism, specifically that numbers exist independently of the physical objects they might enumerate. We have a symbol for the number 3 and a word for it, but neither of these tokens is the number 3 itself. The non-physical idealist nature of numbers will become important when we start contemplating the superposition. Our modern understanding of the physical world is the so-called standard model, in which particles like protons and neutrons are in turn comprised of various flavors of quark, which along with other particles like electrons and neutrinos are considered fundamental. The model also describes the forces acting between these particles. This model has been spectacularly successful in predicting the behavior of the world, and its fruit, among many, is the smart device on which you are likely accessing this presentation. The standard model, which is essentially mathematical, is commonly referred to as an instrument. While this instrument predicts all sorts of behavior in our observed reality, the philosophy of instrumentalism leaves us still pondering what these fundamental objects of reality are. What is a quark? What is an electron? As the philosopher Immanuel Kant put it, we long to know the thing in itself, das Ding an sich, the reality that exists quite independently of our perceptions. Before Wycliffe's translations, the Christian Gospels were written in Greek and Latin and could only be accessed by an elite clergy. It was a revolution to have them written in the common tongue, for everyone could at last encounter their truths directly. In the same way, when considering the fundamental structure of reality, we will for now be putting the mathematics to one side, beautiful though it certainly is. At the end of the 19th century, it was widely assumed that light, which was obviously a wave phenomenon, must be transmitted, just like any wave, through a medium, like sound waves travelling through water or air. This supposed medium was known as the luminiferous ether. Albert Michelson and Edward Morley set up an experiment designed to detect this ether. It was assumed that the Earth, in its motion orbiting the Sun, would have a velocity relative to the ether. By 1887, they had refined their apparatus to adequately accommodate the large difference between the velocity of light and the velocity of the Earth. Their sensational conclusion was that the luminiferous ether does not exist, and their result has been confirmed by progressively more accurate apparatus as recently as 2007. The 1887 result was the starting gun of what was to become the new physics. In 1905, a young Albert Einstein proposed a somewhat outrageous postulate that the velocity of light is invariant in any inertial reference frame. Instead of explaining the velocity of light and why it is the same however we measure it, he merely kicked the can down the road. In popular expositions of special relativity, we are told that Einstein imagined riding on a beam of light that is departing from a given event. For this observer, time would appear to stop for that event. However, the issue is that most of the time we study events by way of the light reflected off them. Again, what we really want to know is what is happening at the event itself, as distinct from what we observe of the event. Is mathematics created out of nowhere, or does it already exist somewhere, and we merely discover it? At the turn of the 20th century, this ancient conundrum was addressed by two groups of mathematicians, the formalists, founded by David Hilbert, and the logicists, founded by Gottlob Frege. The formalists assumed mathematics to be created, and mere symbol manipulation, while the logicists, especially Alfred Whitehead and Bertrand Russell, believed mathematics to be discovered and ultimately an extension of logic. Their pursuits were famously brought to a screeching halt by the Platonist Kurt Gödel, who used the notion of self-reference to show that mathematics will always be incomplete. Self-reference was an ancient paradox going back to Epimenides in the 6th century before Jesus, and ironically was well known to Russell. The Apostle Paul alluded to it in his letter to Titus. To paraphrase, he declared that Cretans are always liars, for a Cretan had told him so. Before Kurt put the kibosh on everything, Alan Turing had invented an abstract mathematical construct for testing the truth or otherwise of any mathematical statement in Hilbert's formalist program, which became known eponymously as a Turing machine. Despite being an abstraction, Turing's machine defined the essential logic of computation that is at the basis of the physical computing machines we have today. Are we living in a simulation, asks the philosopher Nick Bostrom. At the turn of the 21st century, this possibility was, somewhat disappointingly, explored in popular culture by the Matrix series of movies. If every aspect of what we perceive to be reality is in fact simulated by a computer, then that real computer behind our existence must be extraordinarily powerful. The perennial problem, however, is that this supercomputer may itself in turn be simulated by some other even larger hypercomputer, and so on ad infinitum. It's turtles all the way down, says a little old lady in an anecdote recorded by Stephen Hawking. These ideas have not surprisingly become less fashionable of late, although contemporary shows like the Iris Affair again attempt to explore the idea. A universal Turing machine is a Turing machine that can simulate any Turing machine, including itself. Indeed, modern computing operating systems can run an application called a virtual machine, a simulation of its physical host computer. If you spin up the virtual machine application, you can launch yet another virtual machine within that virtual machine and keep embedding them repeatedly until the physical host computer, of course, grinds to a halt, likely in a cloud of smoke. Unlike a physical computer, however, a Turing machine is entirely abstract. Just like those numbers we discussed earlier, these machines do not exist in the physical world. So let's take one of the simplest of these universal machines and get it to simulate itself. Next, we get this simulated machine to simulate its host machine, and in this process of self-reference, we end up with a two-machine device like a Möbius strip holding itself up by its own bootstraps. Neither machine exists except when simulated by the other, so we end up with something where previously nothing existed. We will refer to this device as a monad, a name going back to Pythagoras and signifying a basic building block of reality. Such a perpetuum mobile is impossible in the physical world, but is entirely possible in the world of abstraction. What can we say about this monad? At a fundamental level, it represents a clock, for there is a finite period between each machine simulating the other. The absolute period is not important, but let's assume for now that the monad oscillates at the max Planck frequency, that is to say it ticks approximately 10 to the power 43, or 10 million trillion times a second. The oscillation of the monad is the source of time in the physical universe. Being an abstraction, however, the monad occupies no volume. Its lineal dimensions are 0 by 0 by 0 meters, the same dimensions of the singularity we encounter at the Big Bang. John von Neumann introduced the idea of a universal replicator, a machine that can replicate itself. Let's now suppose that the monad, consisting of universal Turing machines, can likewise replicate itself, not by drawing on physical material in the universe, as do von Neumann's replicators, or replicating living cells for that matter, but by drawing on numbers, abstract numbers. If a monad could replicate itself in, say, 100 clock cycles, there would be 2 to the power 10 to the power 41 monads generated just 1 second after the Big Bang. The important point here is that the monads thus generated would still occupy a singularity. There is not yet any space in the universe, just a superposition of monads at a singularity, each oscillating at precisely the same frequency, for unlike physical clocks, these monads are not subject to friction or any other well-known physical source of temporal drift. The monad, except that it has created time, is itself outside of physical reality. These monads, superimposed at the singularity, are not yet doing anything particularly useful except generating time as they hold themselves in existence. The next step is for each monad to simulate an atom or indivisible instance of space. Conventional conceptions of space now assume it to be fluid and flexible, which it is. But in the superposition hypothesis, we return to an absolute Newtonian space, albeit an expanding cubic lattice. In the late 1960s, computing pioneer Konrad Zuse introduced the idea of space that calculates, or rechnender Raum. He imagined space to be a simple cubic lattice of cellular automata, with each cubic cell able to communicate with each of its 26 neighbouring cells. Imagine the oscillating centre of a Rubik's cube. We again assume that, like time, the simulation of space happens at the Planck scale, so that each monad would simulate an atom of space, approximately 10 to the power minus 35 metres cubed. This simulated atom of space and its associated monad would be just such a cellular automaton as that imagined by Zuse. Imagine that each cell in this lattice has a simple Cartesian address, and that each cell's address, consisting of 256-bit or higher x, y, and z coordinates, is stored in each monad that simulates it. We then assume that each monad can interface, that is, exchange information, with every other monad directly through the superposition. Thus, the space atoms, or cells, generated by their respective monads can directly and instantaneously interface with their immediate neighbours in space, as well as directly communicating with cells on opposite sides of the universe in what has been known as spooky action at a distance. Finally, we imagine that each of these monads is programmed with the laws of physics, the standard model we mentioned earlier, and that each atom of space can simulate any instance of physical reality, just as a modern physical computer might attempt to simulate physical reality in, say, a computer game, albeit in approximation. This space atom lattice is in effect a reimagining of the luminiferous ether, except it is now the transmission medium for all instances of reality. When the universe first exists in time, there is an exponential generation of monads and their corresponding space atoms, which corresponds to the so-called inflationary era. After this initial inflation, there is an accelerating expansion of ordinary space, for space expands uniformly from each existing cell as each replicates. This is the source of the redshifting of light. As the distance travelled by a photon increases, the number of additional space atoms inserted in its path likewise increases. Imagine a straight chain of 10 to the power 35, that is 10 followed by 34 zeros, space atoms, a chain which would be 1 metre long. The first atom in this chain is simulating a photon of light, whose direction of travel, velocity, is along this chain of space atoms. The information of this photon is transferred to its adjacent space atom in 1 clock cycle, that is 1 divided by 10 to the power 43 of a second. Like a bucket brigade, the photon is transferred on to the next space atom, and so on until it has been transferred along each of the 10 to the power 35 space atoms. The velocity of 10 to the minus 35 meters in 10 to the minus 43 seconds happens to be the speed of light in a vacuum. This then is the fastest speed that anything in physical reality can be translated across the lattice of space. This desultory transferring of information through the lattice is the source of inertia in the physical world. In particle accelerators, protons are accelerated across the lattice at velocities close to the speed of light, but they can never translate their information across the cells of the lattice any faster than the speed of light. So even when sitting still, each of the approximately 10 to the power 108 space atoms, which the average human occupies, is translating through the fixed lattice of space at the speed of the Earth's rotation and the velocity of the Earth's orbit around the Sun and the Sun's orbit around the galactic center and the Milky Way's orbit around the local group around the Virgo supercluster, and so on, and is right now interacting with messengers of gravity and light arriving from all those increasingly distant districts of the universe. At all times, we have a direct relationship with the fixed lattice of space and the superposition supporting that lattice. This idea is quite counterintuitive. Physicalism imagines that the chemical atoms of reality move like solid particles through empty space, which is imagined as nothingness. Instead, the superposition hypothesis imagines that even empty space is a rich computation, and that the information of any given physical reality is communicated across the lattice of space, one space atom cell at a time. All activity in the physical world is thus the transfer of the information about reality between cells of the lattice according to the laws of physics, programmed into the monads supporting each of the cells of the lattice. The observable universe contains approximately 10 to the power 186 Planck volumes, that is, atoms of space. While this may seem a big number, it is far from infinite. Indeed, we can assume that there is a finite, countable number of monads in the superposition. However, there is no limit to the number of additional monads that can be created out of nothing at the superposition. Of course, the universe is likely to be significantly larger than what we can observe of it. The reason the theory of general relativity is a good approximation to reality, it is a classical continuous theory, and so can only approximate our quantized reality, is that gravitons, the information packets which carry the force of gravity, take a finite amount of time to reach their destinations, during which time they have interacted with other gravitons, been deflected, and encountered additional space cells in the expanding space they have traversed. There is a lot of talk lately about artificial intelligence and what it will mean for the future of humanity. During humanity's technological development, we have invented computers and gone on to develop artificial intelligence hosted on those computing platforms. But now we have seen that at the superposition, there is a vast pre-existing machine intelligence, a computation that dates to the Big Bang, running at a clock frequency of 10 to the power 43 Hertz and having unlimited information storage capacity. Whenever the superposition needs more memory, it merely generates more monads out of the numbers from which they are composed. The superposition is, however, outside of physics. Even though it generates physics, it is itself fundamentally metaphysical. So we now proceed to consider the metaphysical implications of the superposition hypothesis. The letter to the Hebrews attempted to explain to Jews why Christianity extended beyond them and out to the Gentiles. Likewise, this story attempts to explain to Christians why Christianity extends beyond them and out to every person on earth. The philosopher René Descartes, who invented Cartesian coordinates, famously declared cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Rene was somewhat profanely declaring that he was God, for the Hebrew name of God is the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, routinely pronounced Yahweh, derived from the verb to be and translating as I am who I am. Indeed, Jesus, more than a millennium earlier, declared himself to be God in a similar manner when he said in John, "Before Abraham was, I am." However, Jesus also suggested that each one of us is identical to himself when he declared in Matthew, "To the extent that you did it to one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did it to me." He furthermore declared that when any of us speaks, it is the Spirit of our Father that speaks through us, implying that God is everyone's Father. Of course, neither Rene nor Jesus imagined themselves to be God, but they did perceive that they were possessed of the mind of God. Rene was a philosophical dualist, believing that mind and body are two separate substances. In the modern world, by contrast, we who are declared of sound mind conventionally imagine that our mind is an emergent property of machinations in the atoms of our independent brains. In the superposition hypothesis, we are introduced to a vast superintelligence that existed in the beginning and long before the evolutionary emergence of humanity. Indeed, we are now attempting to access this superposition through our research into quantum computing. So, let us simply imagine that our mind is the mind of the superposition, and we are merely the vessels of that mind. Imagine that each of our minds is someone else's mind, that is, the mind of the superposition, and that our brain is merely an experiential node that incorporates a volition engine, letting each of us decide what actions we take under the direction of that mind. We humans are then analogous to individual computing devices, each with its own local processor and memory, that are accessing a much bigger computation, the internet. In this way, we can see that all of us, great and small, black and white, male and female, share just one mind in common, and we are thus all equal when arrayed before that mind of the superposition. Indeed, all conscious animals would, in this model, share this universal mind, albeit to lesser extents. 500 years before Jesus declared in Matthew and Luke that every hair on our heads is numbered, Pythagoras declared that all is number. Jesus was famously scholastic, in Luke debating the scriptures with the teachers in the temple aged just 12, so it is possible that when he commenced his ministry he became versed in ancient Greek philosophy and knew of Pythagoras' conjecture. But without wanting to unnecessarily upset anyone, we should keep in mind that many of the sayings of Jesus and reports on his life may have been attributed gratuitously by the writers of the Gospels, often to deliberately fulfill prophecy. For example, the myth of the virgin birth had its genesis in the mistranslation of the Hebrew word alma, meaning young woman, into the Greek parthenos, meaning virgin, in the 3rd century before Jesus' translation of Isaiah in the Septuagint. If Isaiah had intended to portray Mary as a virgin, he would have specifically used the Hebrew word betula, which does mean virgin, and was a word Isaiah used often elsewhere in his book. The stories Matthew invents to perpetuate the myth are particularly ingenious in hindsight. Here we are at Honeysuckle Creek, where Neil's famous line, "One small step for a man," was received electromagnetically from the moon in July 1969. Who can forget Marvin, the paranoid android with a brain the size of a planet? Quite seriously, folks, this lonely planet is all we've got. God gave us this creation to care and tend for, but we whitefellas have instead relentlessly destroyed it. There's not going to be a new heaven and a new earth, nor will there be some magical New Jerusalem coming floating down from the sky, like Stonehenge descending in the movie Spinal Tap. There is no other place. This is the real thing, and the entire system has been all about life, not death. But as we shall see, there is hope beyond the grave. The sun can likely sustain the earth for another million millennia. And if it and we are to persist into that future, we need to radically change the way we operate this spaceship. So then, we move to the truly speculative implications of the superposition hypothesis. Importantly, although the superposition is finite, we have seen that its memory can be expanded indefinitely. In that moment, when any of us dies, we are backed up in the superposition. When our life flashes before our eyes, a flash memory backup is taken. A further 10 to the power 108 monads are generated in the superposition to store each of these backups. Indeed, high-definition backups are taken every night as we sleep. A human, being a temple of the mind of the superposition, is only conscious when it is incarnate, having flesh and blood, and living in space and time. When a human being is backed up in the superposition, it is asleep in the superposition, just like any computer backup is not active until it is restored. At any juncture in the future, any given human that has died and been backed up can be restored to an empty set of 10 to the power 108 space atoms in the lattice of space, typically on the surface of the Earth. In the general resurrection to come then, all 109 billion humans who have previously existed since the emergence of Homo sapiens sapiens 190,000 years ago will be restored to the surface of the Earth to join the 8 billion who are still living to be the subjects of judgment. They will each regain consciousness in the resurrection an instant after they originally lost consciousness in death. As Jesus declared in Luke to his co-executed, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Before we investigate this judgment, it is important to know that disease, aging, and death are not necessary realities. They are what are called, in philosophical parlance, contingent realities. They ain't necessarily so. Indeed, most of us think of the human body as a machine that wears out and eventually grinds to a halt like a motor car. However, unlike a car, the body is a self-repairing mechanism. The conjecture here is that degeneration and mortality are imposed conditions that can be lifted in the general resurrection. You might need the faith to move mountains, as Paul suggested in his letter to the Corinthians, to arrive at this conclusion, but there it is. The general resurrection is one supreme miracle. There are many analogies we can use to explain this current mortal coil. It is as if humanity has been a child growing up under the control and direction of a parent. Finite boundaries have been placed on our lives so that we might make the most of the short time we are given. The world is deliberately made to appear broken so that we might discover how it works and how we might go about fixing it, that we should discover how the body works so that we might go about healing it. In the superposition, in this present life, if the superposition in this present life behaved consistently, if good people were always rewarded and bad people were always punished, the superposition would be rumbled and progress would grind to a halt inside a milieu of fear. No one would dare take a chance in life lest they discover that they had taken a painfully wrong turn. The analogy is the servant in Matthew and Luke, who was given just one talent and then simply buried it out of fear of retribution. If the world were otherwise, if we, when monkeys in the jungle, had always lived indefinitely, we would never have progressed to the point of comprehending the superposition. There is no magic instruction manual that the superposition can write with its finger in stone like the tablets on Mount Sinai. Moses will of course confirm this and the whole broken stone saga on his return. Language is an abstraction. The superposition does not speak English or any other spoken language except where its agents speak through special revelation. The superposition itself is a mathematical abstraction. Its language is the universal language of mathematics. Laissez-faire capitalism has been proven to be the most efficient method of driving innovation, but once our toolkit has been developed and is complete, as a general economic principle it becomes counterproductive, and there exist many more efficient ways of providing the world's needs. In many cultures it is assumed that aging, disease and death have been the result of something we, or our ancestors, have done wrong. We all have an innate tendency to put ourselves before others, which is in the direction of the political right. All we, says Isaiah, like sheep, have turned everyone to their own way. Jesus was the exemplar of someone who put all others before himself, which is in the direction of the political left. If we are all to endeavour to become like Jesus, we must likewise put all others before ourselves. But this will only be possible if the scourge of disease, aging and death is lifted from us, as has so often been promised. So here is one very transactional deal of a lifetime. When the end finally comes, be it sooner or later, each one of us gives over everything we own: our life, our heart, our homes, our property, our NFTs, our cash reserves, our shares, our bonds, our superannuation, our titles, the whole lot. Well, maybe hold on to your toothbrush. To a very big company called the Commonwealth of Heaven. In exchange, we each get a single shareholding in that company and are delivered its dividends. Oh, and life everlasting. One assumes that in life everlasting, young people will grow older to the prime of their life, old people will grow younger to the prime of their life, whatever each of those primes might be, and that all disease and disability will evaporate. This resetting of the economy is generally referred to as a Levitical Jubilee. It may sound like it is too good to be true, but in the superposition, all things are possible. In earlier revelations from John and Paul, we are told that he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the former things have passed away. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. In Jesus' parable of the talents, note that when the master, that is Jesus, returns, we who have been growing his business on his behalf return those capital gains to him, because they were his all along. Time is money, so the implication of life everlasting is of radical abundance. Indeed, everyone on earth will hit the jackpot. The Commonwealth will run this spaceship under an environmentally sustainable economic model. For anything less than 100% sustainability will see us quickly running out of resources over the course of 1 million millennia. For example, 99.98% sustainability will see us run out of resources in less than 1 millennium, let alone 1 million of them. For the widow in Mark and Luke, this ceremony won't be difficult. She had only 2 copper coins to her name, but gave it all. For the rich young ruler in Matthew, Mark and Luke, who some suggest was Saul of Tarsus, it will not be so easy. For when Jesus asked him to hand it all over, he turned and walked away sad. But then even the wealthiest person in the world will surely be attracted to the prize of life everlasting. And thus, as prophesied by John, will Babylon, symbolizing the world's current financial structures, fall in just a single hour. It is entirely possible that there will be folks who do not want to participate in the Commonwealth. Such is their right, and the option to grow old and die quietly, will of course be available to anyone who in their heart chooses such a fate. However, such individuals will only be able to trade with those who have likewise joined with them in rejecting the offer to join the Commonwealth. Eventually, these outcasts will have no one left to trade with and will gradually fade away. They can always, of course, decide to come to their senses. Meanwhile, those who in this life followed something approximating Christian values, a cohort not limited to professing Christians, will be walking on air after this fulfillment of all they might have hoped for. Such people always put the salvation of others before their own salvation. But what about all the bad people in history who are now back with us, restored in the general resurrection from their backups in the superposition? Like the woman in John who was caught in adultery, they will be given just one last chance to escape condemnation and go forward to sin no longer, to do unto others what they would have be done unto them. Jesus, who is now back with us on earth in person and running the Commonwealth from the right hand of the superposition, does not want a single person to be lost in this event. In Matthew and Luke, he famously left the 99 sheep who were saved and went looking for the one lost sheep. For as it happens, everyone is to be found in the Lamb's book of life. The threats conveyed by John of eternal punishment in lakes of fire burning with brimstone, and even by Jesus in Luke in the story of Lazarus and Dives, are analogous to the threats that parents make to their children, having no intention of ever following through on them. Baptism is the washing away of all sin, even the most egregious crimes against humanity. The perpetrators of such did not know what they were doing. However, after the day of judgment, there can be no last chances, because people who cannot become like Jesus are incompatible with the Commonwealth of Heaven. Because they have the mind of the superposition, as Paul notes in his letter to the Galatians, there is not one person in history who does not know in their conscience what is right and what is wrong. Anyone of any age who even thinks to harm their neighbour in the new order will be switched off by the superposition before they can enact their intent. They will no longer be part of the Commonwealth, and their backups will be stamped NTBR, never to be restored. A cruel fate, but fair to everyone else. They alone will be forever removed from the Lamb's book of life. The only possible exceptions, again through the intercession of Jesus, will be those who might foolishly defy the superposition in the early hours of the general resurrection. Indeed, these procedures, giving everything to God and switching people off, were stark features of the very early church as recorded by Luke, where a man and later his wife instantly dropped down dead after blaspheming, who was then described as the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the only member of the Trinity who exists. God the Father is an anthropomorphism, and Jesus the Son was and was not and will again become human, albeit a human like us, with the mind of God. The important point is that when Jesus returns, he remains the Holy Spirit's anointed leader. There will be a lot of people needing to be billeted in the general resurrection. Backyards and front yards will be covered in tents. We are expecting a tenfold increase in the population. But if there is no room at the inn, souls will possibly return in waves so that we have time to organise their accommodation. Either way, there will be dancing in the streets as people go about prodding previously lost loved ones, just like Thomas did in John, to ensure they are not ghosts. While this spaceship can easily support a human population of 117 billion, there are limits. As Jesus declared in Matthew, Mark and Luke, there is no giving or taking in marriage in the general resurrection, for we will all be like angels in heaven. However, Jesus did not suggest There will no longer be any interfacing in the Commonwealth of Heaven. Just confirm that with him, of course, when he gets back. To discourage unbridled procreation, a person's share in the Commonwealth will be diluted down onto their future progeny. Typically, couples in the general resurrection will have no children, retaining their shares. Some couples will have one child, diluting that family's holding to 2/3 of a share each, or they might have two children, diluting that family's holding to 1/4 of a share each. Couples in that next generation will then likely limit themselves to having just one child after considering the expense, until after about 30 generations, towards the end of the first millennium, we encounter the last breeding couple on Earth, who go on to produce the last child on Earth. After that joyous event, there will be another jubilee, and once again every extant individual will hold one full share in the Commonwealth of Heaven in perpetuity. So then, to paraphrase Jesus in Matthew, this good news of the Commonwealth of Heaven will be preached in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Finally, I'm sorry if I appear to have been lacking a heart here, a bit like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. As Paul noted in his first letter to the Corinthians, if we have not love, we are like a ringing gong or a clanging cymbal. Being incarnate gives us the capacity for love.